that was used in order to try to make changes aimed at what I would call fiscal responsibility, which means if you have a deficit, you do old-fashioned things like increasing taxes and cutting spending. Increasingly, reconciliation has been used as a vehicle for fiscal irresponsibility, which is if you have a deficit, let's cut taxes, which is what's been happening during most of the decade of the 2000s. Nothing that I am saying here should be associated in any way with the Congressional Budget Office, even though I don't work there. You know, but the fact that I'm in the Congressional Budget Office, whenever I say, I'm programmed if I say something that could be viewed as partisan to give that disclaimer anyway, because I'm standing in the Alice Ripland conference room, you know, and otherwise, you know, lightning would strike me or something. So, you know, my own view is that the budget resolution and reconciliation have not been used as vehicles for fiscal responsibility, but rather as for fiscal irresponsibility, which I would also say is true of presidential budgets over the last 7 or 8 years. Which leads me to my next point, which is a general abdication of leadership, and I would put everybody sort of together in that abdication of leadership. In fact, you may have heard that David Walker, who used to be the Comptroller General, the head of the GAO, has left the GAO to become the head of this new foundation, which was created by Pete Peterson, which is supposed to be leading this sort of grassroots effort to convince people that this problem that I just talked about with the big scary chart is really a big problem. And I think it's very instructive that he didn't think in his job as Comptroller General of the United States, which is a relatively powerful position, that he could actually do that from the inside, that he actually thought he had to go outside the government and try to build some grassroots effort in order to convince people that they needed to exercise leadership on this issue. Fourth, we have the explosion of earmarks. Now, earmarks, I think, get more attention than they deserve in one sense, because as I was suggesting earlier, it's not a lot of money. But earmarks, as you may know, they're another name for you know, pork barrel spending or spending with a zip code attached. Any effort on the part of members of Congress to put money into appropriation bills or to otherwise designate how money gets spent without, instead of basically allowing the executive branch to make those choices, those are viewed as earmarks. And we used to have maybe a couple of thousand of those in a given year, and it went from, in 1998, there were 2,000 earmarks in that year. By 2005, there were 14,000. Now, for those of you who want to view the glass as, you know, partially full, we went all the way down to 11,600 in 2008 from 14,000. But there's a lot of attention, and the reason I mention this is not because I think it's necessarily all that important, although I think, you know, there are some bad things about earmarks, but that to the extent that the budget gets focused on in the presidential campaign, earmarks are going to be one of the things that gets focus, and frankly gets more focus than it deserves relative to some of these other problems that I was identifying. And Senator McCain in particular has been a vocal opponent of earmarks over a long period of time, and there's nothing wrong with being a vocal opponent of earmarks, but there's a lot else that's going on besides earmarks. And then finally, there's this problem with incremental budgeting in general. Incremental budgeting is just a way of saying that the budget tends to just sort of grow a little bit at a time, and people don't necessarily look at what's already happening. They just focus on the changes at the margin. And one of the things that we've seen over a long period of time is a lot of reform efforts that have aimed at trying to better link the choice of expenditures to what you get for those expenditures to performance. And the Bush administration has actually been quite active on this score. But nonetheless, there's still limited attention that's paid to the performance implications of spending, particularly in the Congress. I think that the executive branch has done a much more systematic job, because if you tell a member of Congress that a particular program that they like a lot doesn't work, then it doesn't matter to them really, because they like the program because it benefits people in their